All right, welcome. Ooh, microphone. Welcome to my talk on managing commissions in Odoo. My name is Jared Kipe. I am the president and a developer at eBoo. We are a gold partner in the United States, located in Washington State. So if you're not familiar with commissions, commissions are kind of a form of compensation that is basically kind of like revenue sharing in a lot of ways, right? So you, a salesperson, it's almost always sales based. A salesperson will make a sale. Usually that means an invoice. If there's a salesperson goes to the invoice and they effectively get a portion of the revenue from that invoice. So kind of decisions and configuration that we want to talk about. We have kind of the decision on when you recognize that commission as a liability. So typically that would be on posting an invoice, right? So creating an invoice and then confirming the invoice, posting it in 13. This is in 13, by the way. Or on the invoice paid. So basically when an invoice is marked paid or paid through the system, then you would recognize the commission as being allowed right then and there. In effect, you actually, we always create the commission when the invoice is posted. We just confirm or create the journal entry that the commission creates when the kind of event has occurred. What do you pay the commission on? So effectively, invoice total versus invoice margin. One of these is easier to understand in a lot of ways for a lot of organizations, but ultimately invoice margin is usually better because it kind of encourages the salespeople to make deals that are beneficial to the company and not just like really big deals, right? So obviously all of the employees have different commission rates. It's probably baked into yearly reviews and contracts and things like that. And so we have a couple of fields on the employee contract model to look at. How you pay it. So in the US and probably everywhere, the commission is a fully taxable income, basically. So paying it isn't as easy as just cutting a check for like a reimbursement for an expense or something like that. You need to get this to a payroll provider, or in this case, Odoo, 13 with payroll and stuff. We'll take a look at that. And then we have some kind of more advanced use cases. We have a like administrative or assistant-based commission structure as well, or like mechanism. And then we have customer-specific commission structures, which is kind of a more advanced way of, or maybe not advanced, but really specific. So if you've got a really big customer that comes in from a specific sales channel, or maybe even a external party like a recruiting or whatever company or partner, then you may need to have kind of a customer-specific ordered list and commission rates for different employees and things like that. So we'll take a look at those as well. And ultimately, at the end of the day, commissions are kind of both motivational and compensatory. So kind of some reporting and dashboard-like objects or resources for the employee is always a good thing. So that said, let's start by going into the main accounting configuration. All right, so we'll scroll down here to the commission section, and we see a variety of fields, the first of which is the journal. This is the journal that the commissions will take place in. So you have your invoices in one journal. When the invoice is confirmed, a journal entry will be created in this commissions journal. And so I already made one in advance. And if we pop that open, very important that you fill in the default debit and credit accounts. These are basically the accounts that the commissions would be recognized into as an expense, as is indicated by this. If you fail to set up either of these, then when the commission goes to get posted, specifically not created, because we can't create it without creating a journal entry, you'll see an error that the commission journal isn't set up properly. Now we have the liability account, and you'll note that in the description up above it that if you leave this empty, then you're using the employee's private addresses accounts payable. So every employee has a private address or home address. It's usually where they put information related to like their private phone numbers and addresses, and ultimately that's kind of the object that payroll uses to collect up balances that are due to the employee. So you can leave that blank, or you can fill it with a liability account. I have a commission payable account here, but I'll pop that open and we'll see that it's just a current liability. It's not a payable account. Could be theoretically, but then it would be a little harder to get back to the employee. This one in particular kind of goes back to, geez, am I in debug? I guess so. I don't see debug in my menu, but I am in debug. Anyway, the next item up for here is pay commission, which is unfortunate. Kind of the label's broken up onto 2 lines. So this we pay based on invoice validation or paid, as I described earlier. I'm going to go ahead and choose paid, but I'll have to kind of come back here for a reason we'll see a little later. And then the commission base, which is on invoice margin or on invoice total. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that on invoice margin. So I'll go ahead and hit save. And get out of debug so I don't have all these hover tips. Guess we have to do this. Leave developer tools. All right. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and go and create a sale order. Well, actually, we should talk about how the employee setup portion of it, specifically the rates that they're going to be receiving commission for. So I'll go to employees. I'll pop open the admin user's employee and their contract specifically. And these are the 2 fields that I was referring to. So the first one's pretty self-explanatory, commission percentage. It's basically whatever the balance of the commission itself is, multiplied by this is the total commission that you're going to be paying. And then we have an admin commission, which we'll get back to in a little bit. So with those kind of out of the way, let's go ahead and go and create a sale. So I will create a sale for a random partner here with the demo data. I created a couple of products in advance, a low cost here, which has a pretty reasonable amount of margin. I guess I might have mixed those up there, but let's go ahead and order several of these to get a bigger value here. So this is margin on sale orders, which is stock Odoo, right? And at this point, well, we should point out that as I am logged in as that user, I am implicitly the salesperson, and that particular customer doesn't have a salesperson, otherwise they would have been that one as well. So after creating or validating, I can create an invoice. And creating the invoice, as expected, we'll come over here. We have the same margin or a very similar margin over here calculation, which is part of our Odoo suite for invoices. So we'll go ahead and confirm it. And upon confirming it, we have created a commission object. So if we click on it, we'll see that it's in a draft state, a new state. And we'll go ahead and click on that to take a look at some of the values. So of course we have the employee and the contract that was discovered for the employee based on the time period and whether it's running. We have a source move, or invoice in this case. And we have a rate type. If we edit this, we'll note that there's a variety of rate types, including manual. So you can, in fact, just create commission objects completely out of nowhere if you have a particular need to do that. It's come up. And then we have the rate, which is not editable because it's coming from the contract, and we have the rate type of normal. Base total, which is the sum total of the invoice, and then the base amount, which is the margin on the item. So that's why we're paying by margin. And thus, between the 5% and the base amount, we get the amount, and that is effectively what we'd expect to pay for that invoice. So normally we can come over here and register payment on this invoice. And it marks an invoice paid successfully, but our commission is still unfortunately not confirmed. This is being a alpha build of 13. It doesn't quite work right, but we'll get that sorted out eventually, I'm sure. So with that single entry done, let's go ahead and talk about that admin commission rate that I was referring to. So admin commission rates are particularly useful in, well, a variety of scenarios, but one in which either you have a like an administrative assistant for the salesperson. So maybe you have salespeople inputting sales, but you have a set number of people that are doing things with those sale orders, like maybe validating them, or they need to go and do additional steps. Another potential option would be if the employee has like a literal coach or somebody that maybe is their kind of assist or their coach, and they give them some of their contacts or something like that, and they're now their coach, I guess. So that's what this admin percentage rate is right here for Mitchell admin. If we go over to our Mark demo employee over here, we can set up the coach right here, so stock field. So we'll choose the admin and we'll hit save. Let's go ahead and take a look at Mark's contract as well. So he's got a commission rate set as well, no administrative rate, but it probably wouldn't matter because he's not the coach for anybody. So with that done, let's go ahead and make a second sale order. We'll do the high cost one here. So the cost is much closer to this one, so the margin is a lot lower. Let's go ahead and order, several of these items as well. And we need to obviously make sure that we give Mark the credit for this, as that was what we're trying to do. So we'll confirm and invoice again. Mark will come over to the invoice. Oh, and before I validate this invoice, actually, let's go ahead and, well, yeah, never mind. I'll do that afterwards. So we'll post this invoice, and in this case, we got 2 commissions. One is for Mark, which uses the normal type and his base rate, and the other one is for the admin user as the coach rate, right? So the administrative rate. All right, so let's go ahead and just confirm these real fast because they're not going to get confirmed when I pay the invoice. And before going any further, let's go ahead and switch our settings around in our commissions area to be on posting of the invoice itself. So we'll come down here, and instead of invoice paid, we'll say on invoice validation, which probably should say posted now. And give that a little save. All right, so the last kind of way to create commissions, other than I suppose manual, would be to, let's actually talk about refunds first. So if you're doing refunds manually, then make sure that you set the salesperson. Otherwise, most people would do refunds through the, oh no, okay. So let's do a refund through the sale order, which is effectively done by getting the line back to invoiceable. This could have been through a return or an RMA, but in this case, I can just set the quantity on this line. And when we hit save, we will be able to invoice again. And in this case, it's going to generate a customer refund invoice. And that's this one here. And when we post it, we'll get a commission, and importantly, that commission was already confirmed. If we take a look at it, it has basically all the signs reversed just as you would expect from a refund. And so in effect, refunds and handling the commission kind of changes for refunds is just as easy as doing any sort of normal refund or return process that you probably already have. All right, so now on to the last kind of special consideration. If I go into accounting customers, because I don't have contacts installed, let's go ahead and change Azure Interior to have a commission structure. So on the accounting tab, we have an object called a commission structure. We'll create one for a agency. These commission structures can be used and should be used really like around different partners, meaning you should create them for kind of a overarching structure that then you can reuse on different partners and stuff for whatever the negotiated rate is. So we'll create an edit and we'll add an employee. We'll just choose the top one, Abigail, here as kind of the external agency person. So this might be a 1099 contract or something. We'll go ahead and put admin on here as well. I'm going to leave this one 0, and that is kind of a key indicator that we actually want to use the contract rate at whatever it is right now. And then we'll also go ahead and add our Mark user, but we'll set him to a flat 1% on this structure. So with that done, we could create a sale order, but we can also just create an invoice because ultimately everything is driven through invoices anyway. So we'll create an invoice for Azure Interior, and we'll add on some product here. And we'll go ahead and order several of those. And now when we post this invoice, 3 commissions were created. So as expected, we have kind of the external agency commission right here. The rate type is structure, and the rate comes ultimately from the structure itself. So obviously we have structure on all 3 of these, and we have the contract percentage for the admin user, the flat rate percentage for Mark, and ultimately a flat rate for the external agent as well. All right, so with all of those kind of done, let's talk about kind of the next phase, right? So in sales, right, we have the ability for a salesperson to look at the commissions through this top level object. This is kind of a reporting overview for the salesperson. In fact, they'll only be able to see their commissions. As an admin, I can see all the commissions, and as a payer or whatever, I would be able to see all the commissions. But this can be thought of as kind of a generally a dashboard-like thing for the employee, because they can kind of just filter for their confirmed but not paid ones yet, and kind of see what they're expecting to receive in the future, because it is really supposed to be kind of a John and blank here. Who else didn't sleep last night? No? All right, so that same menu is available in accounting under the accounting menu down here for commissions. So let's go ahead and group by employee, and ultimately we could group by status as well, but I don't have any. So I'll go ahead and select maybe a couple of these, or maybe all of them actually, I guess, and I'll use my action mark paid. And that'll redirect me over to a new object, which is the commission payment. The commission payment object is actually really analogous to the expense sheet, if you're familiar with the expenses app. So you have expenses, and then ultimately those get submitted as like a bundled up expenses, as an expense sheet rather. And that's kind of the same thing that we see here. So these are all of the sources and amounts and stuff for all the commissions, and we have some stats or kind of some summary over here. So at this point, if you're not using Payroll and Odoo, then this would probably be the time that you would take this data out of the system and take it into your external payroll provider, or otherwise find a way to actually remit the payment. But here in Odoo, in 13 here, we have our new payroll kind of mechanisms, and I've got a report next payslip button that I will press. Once I press that, the button disappears because it's able to be used in Payroll. So I'll go over to Payroll, and I'll make a new payslip for the admin user for what I just created the payment for. And you'll note that we are linked immediately to all of the commissions that were in that state of like ready to be paid on the next payslip. And down here in the other inputs, we have an amount for 481, which is the summary of all of those commissions. I can hit commute sheet and come over to the salary information, and we have basic wage for commission down here at the bottom, near the bottom anyway. We can of course also click on the commission here and see a list of all of the commissions, and ultimately all those commissions now have a commission payment, and ultimately that commission payment has a salary slip. So you have front to back reporting for all of your needs and deep diving into the various aspects of your commissions. And that about wraps it up for my talk. So do we have any questions? Yes.
What about more complex, let's say, structures, like if one employee has got, let's say, 5%, and if he hits the quota, then he gets higher percentage?
Sure. So the question is basically, can it be extended with more advanced stuff? Of course it can, right? So this is pretty generic functionality for the most part. So building something like that would simply just be a customization on top of the structure object, which really doesn't have much logic at all. It's more just about grouping them right now. So you could certainly add things like that to it over time, for sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is this a standard module, or is it?
No, this is a new module that we just wrote. So this is part of Odoo Suite Enterprise, which is our specifically package of source code that we use that links against Enterprise itself. So in this case, Payroll and things like that. And so it's not, this particular one is not open source. The invoice margin is actually, that's an Odoo Suite, but this module is a new module, and it is, it's not released yet, right? Like, it's still beta, if you will. Yes?
Is there any way to handle product incentives?
So the question is there any way to handle product incentives? Specifically meaning that if they sell more of a specific category or item, yes. Not really, though, again, it's pretty, there's a lot of like hook-like functions and stuff in it that could be used to support mechanisms like that, right? Because ultimately the calculation for what that base amount of the invoice is pretty flexible. So you could obviously implement your own that iterates over all of the invoice lines product and applies different rules or logic to it, for sure. Yeah. Yes?
Can you use it to handle commissions or consignments?
So the question, can you handle commissions on consignments? By consignment, do you mean that you sell something and then they pay it off over time? Or,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. We have a bunch of couple of clinics. We receive some drugs from a school company. We don't pay. Okay, so we collect our money based on the commission and so we meet the balance of the company.
So you're saying that you don't pay
When we receive consignment, we don't pay. All right. So we collect commission on the sales and then we remit the balance of the money to the pharmaceutical company.
Do you create invoices?
Yeah, you create invoices for the sales we make. Okay. So at the end of every month, we reconcile, then we collect commission and then pay the pharmaceutical company the balance.
So kind of the opposite of this, right? So you're not paying the employee as much as you're paying where you took the goods from. That's interesting. I suppose you could. The commission structure theoretically could be used to do that because you could have that external agency. But really, that sounds more like it's product driven. So it's kind of like a mix mash of the two last questions. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that it could theoretically with some modifications and stuff, but we'd have to understand the domain logic there better to give a good answer for sure. Yes.
What if there was a part payment and would?
That's a good question. So in Odoo, in prior versions of Odoo, sorry. So are you asking if they only pay partial of the invoice? How would you pay partial of the commission? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So that's actually a good question. So in prior versions of Odoo, there was no like intermediate paying step. So there wasn't. There was either an invoice was paid or it wasn't paid, basically. And so the invoice paid action is what we hook onto to validate the commission effectively. So in prior versions of Odoo, no. Like basically, if it's an all or nothing kind of a thing, if you were set up in such a way that it was based on invoice paid, then no, it would require the whole invoice to be paid or to be marked paid, right? So if you wrote off some of the rest of the invoice, it would do that as well. But in Odoo 13, that action is triggered even when a partial payment is made, which means that ultimately that's going to get trickier depending on how much we want to follow like an all or nothing thing. In your case, I take it that you're wanting to be able to pay partial commission. Is that true? Okay. Again, could be modified, right? So the calculation and theoretically when the commission object is created could be tweaked, right? So you'd probably defer creation of the invoice or of the commission objects until you receive at least some payment, and then you would, instead of creating the commission base on the either the margin or the total, you'd base it off of the payment amount. So it's theoretically possible, but not possible right now. Oh no.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
How much is the